Welcome to this episode of TBR, a series of the EVPL Footnotes podcast. TBR stands for To Be Read, that pile of books sitting on your nightstand, bookshelf, or table just waiting to be read. This is the podcast for people who embody the phrase, so many books, so little time, and for those who want to ignite a love for reading. Every month we'll be highlighting a few of the new items coming to the EVPL collection, from books to movies to our library of things. So thanks today for Kirt to join me. Kirt Etheridge. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yes.
Okay. He works currently at...
I work at EVPL Oaklyn.
Okay. He's joining me to talk about all the books that we are looking forward to that are coming into our collection. Kirt, why don't you go first?
So the first book that I'm really excited for is one actually that my daughter, who is 2, will enjoy quite a bit. So it's Ballet Bruce, which is one of the many sequels to Mother Bruce by Ryan Higgins. It's a picture book, and in the first book, Mother Bruce, Bruce the bear goes into the woods to try to find himself some eggs to make himself breakfast. And then the eggs hatch.
Uh-oh.
And he finds himself the unwilling parent of a bunch of baby geese. And so then just the following titles are all about his adventures with his terrible geese children. And he's very grumpy, and it has these funny illustrations of this big grumpy bear, and he's doing all of these parent things, but very unwillingly. So Ballet Bruce, just the thought of Bruce the bear wearing a tutu delights me.
That alone, the visual image is amazing.
Yeah. So that one's going to be great. And I know my kid will love it. So I'm excited for that one.
Well, anytime picture books come up, I always have to take an opportunity to mention my all-time favorite picture book. It's called Cinder Edna by Ellen Jackson. And it's, as you could probably guess, a retelling of the Cinderella story, and it's amazing. And we have it in our collection. It's not new, but it's awesome. So definitely worth reading. All right. So the book that I chose, as I was going through the list of new items coming in, was Augusta Hawk by G.M. Mallier. And I have recently found myself getting more into series. This was not something I typically did because I read all over the place, and I don't like getting caught into a series unless it's just unputdownable. But lately I've been doing more series. And so this is a book where a crime novelist finds herself embroiled in a real potential case. Her neighbors have gone missing. Their car has been found abandoned, and she's trying to decide, is this really a real thing? Or am I just thinking like a crime novelist? Ooh. Or is this inspiration for a great new story? Or is something really bad going on?
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's fun.
And this is book 1 of a series. So if it's really good, then I can look forward to more.
Yeah. That's certainly something that I sometimes hesitate on series if they aren't completed, because I like to be able to know how it's going to end. But that book sounds really interesting. It sounds like one I could see becoming, developed for a Netflix movie or something at some point. It seems really cinematic.
You know, you're right. I could see that happening as well if it was well done. I mean, I guess they've kind of done that with Castle. You know? But still, I like the fun variations of those kind of things.
Oh yeah, there's plenty of room for more.
Oh yeah. All right, what's next on your list?
So next on my list, I've got juvenile nonfiction. So this book is If You're a Kid Like Gavin, and it's the true story of Gavin Grimm, who as a teenager was barred from using the boys' restroom at school. He's a trans boy, and he ended up filing suit, and his case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and eventually the Supreme Court upheld his case. And so this book isn't just about that, but it's about what kind of choices you make even as a kid to stand up for yourself and what you know is right. How do you do that? How do you stand up for yourself when other people aren't treating you the way you know you should be treated?
Right.
And I love seeing juvenile nonfiction handled in this way, where it's a book for kids and it's got that little bit of history in there, a little bit of information, but then it also gives kids practical ways to handle their own situations, and not every kid is going to run into a situation so serious that they end up at the
Going
Supreme
to the
Court.
Supreme Court, right?
But most kids run into bullying. Most
Yes.
kids run into situations where their friends or their family are acting in a way that they don't think is right.
Right.
And so I just think it's really important for kids to have
those kind of tools.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
I agree. We are learning that it's really important that kids know how to take a stand and have boundaries, because we've grown up in previous generations where you don't tell an adult no.
Yeah.
And that has been obviously disastrous in some cases.
Yeah.
And so it's learning when and how to make those stands when you need to.
Yeah. And that's something that I really want my own kid to know.
Of course.
You know? And so I just always like seeing books like that come in. They might not be for every kid, but
Right.
they will be for some kids. Some kids will really, really need that book.
Yeah, that sounds really good. So the next book is The Book of Gothel by Mary McKinney. And I am a big fan of retellings. I like folk tales and fairy tales that have taken a new spin. And that's basically what this one is. It's a play on the Rapunzel story that incorporates the origin story of the witch that keeps Rapunzel trapped in the tower. And what was interesting was I was recently gifted a copy of this book. It was like I had an option of several books, and I was kind of trying to be selective because I could just take home all the books, and I'm trying to have a little restraint. So I picked up that book just because it looked really interesting. And as I was skimming through our list to prepare for this podcast, I saw the title and I looked it up, and I'm like, oh, it's that book I got, But I really do like retellings. I like re-examining the lessons and the ideas and the concepts.
Yeah, that's something that really interests me too, the idea of just shifting that lens a little bit,
Yes.
Because we're so used to the traditional. I mean, you said Rapunzel and I immediately knew the story. Everybody knows that story.
Course.
But what if it were a little different? Or
Right.
what if you looked at a different point of view? So that's fascinating to me.
I watched the Disney movie of Rapunzel, and there's this one scene that cracks me up, but I also feel like, wow, this is so very accurate. And it was where the prince has broken Rapunzel out. And so she's doing this alternating, wee, I'm free. And she's dancing through the fields because she's free. And then it cuts to her sobbing, I'm a terrible daughter.
Yes.
I've abandoned her. And I'm like, I think if you were locked up forever, that would be more or less your reaction. It's like a combination of finally being free, but also terrible guilt that this relationship, even though it was an unhealthy one, it's the one you know.
Oh, yeah. Well, and even if you're a teenager who has a decent relationship with your parents, when you're leaving to go to college or strike out on your own, there is this moment of guilt, like, oh, wow, I'm leaving my parents behind.
Yes,
this
exactly.
is weird. And so, yeah, that one.
You're
is
happy,
really
but
funny.
you feel bad because you're happy about it.
Yeah.
That's
And it's
exactly
like,
it.
oh my gosh, like, what the heck?
Yeah.
So
yeah, I enjoy that. All right. What else are you thinking about?
So the next title that I'm really looking forward to, it's been on my TBR list for a while. It's called Night of the Living Res, and it's by Morgan Talty. And so Morgan Talty is a citizen of the Penobscot Indian Nation, which is in Maine.
Okay.
And I actually, when I first heard of this book, I saw the word Penobscot, and my brain went straight to all of Stephen King's works that are set in Derry, Maine, which is in that same area. And I was like, And so I got really curious. And so this book, it's actually a debut collection. So it's a short story collection, and it's from that Indigenous perspective. So in the collection, the author tells stories of family and community in magical realism, almost kind of speculative. And so there's stories like there's a grandmother who has dementia and she starts projecting the past onto her grandson. There's one where there are a couple of friends who get inspired by Antiques Roadshow and try to steal from the tribal museum to sell.
That is not okay.
Yeah. And so, but it's written from this Indigenous perspective.
Right.
And so I'm really interested in that. And I also really like short story collections. I have ADHD, and sometimes I struggle to focus on longer form stories.
Right.
But if you have a short story collection then I can read a story and then be done.
Right.
And take a break. And so I'm very excited for that. And I'm excited that our library collection includes things like short story collections, which might not be what you typically expect, but then it just adds so much variety.
I really like a good short story collection. And for much of the same reason as you, sometimes for me, time was a factor.
Yes.
And there would be sometimes long interruptions between reading sessions, as it were. But if I had a collection of good short stories, I could complete a story. And even if it was a couple of weeks before I could pick that book back up again, I wasn't like having to go, wait, where did we leave off?
Right.
So I can definitely appreciate that. When I had 3 small children at home, time was non-existent.
Yeah.
You know?
I work full time and parent full time and am in grad school, and there's simply no time for longer things. So
what's sleep? Who cares?
I don't know. No, there's no such thing as sleep. And so, I really appreciate having short story collections to read.
All right. So the next book I've chosen is a nonfiction book. I like to always choose something from the nonfiction collection, which I also really enjoy. And this one is actually written by the co-host of a podcast that I used to listen to. And I believe the podcast name and the title are the same. Cults Inside the World's Most Notorious Groups and Understanding the People Who Join Them by Max Cutler.
Ooh.
Yes.
I want to be clear that I don't like cults.
Right.
Cults are bad.
Right.
I am fascinated by reading about them. I mean, I watch all kinds of investigation discovery and things like that. So I'm interested to hear more about that.
Fascinated with that. I really enjoyed reading Educated by Tara. I'm blanking on her
Westover.
name. Westover. That was it. And I also watched the Netflix show and read the original book called Unorthodox.
Yes.
You know, and it's so easy to think, well, I would never, and I feel like examining these cults really show how subtle and insidious they can be. Yeah. And people have said in the past that people sometimes will join gangs for a sense of community and belonging. And I feel like people join cults for the same type of reason. I'm sure there's no one reason, but I can see that being a big factor.
No, and that's definitely something that, it's human nature to want to belong.
Exactly.
One of the most recent, it's not entirely cult-centric, but the local author, Shauna K. Rodenberg, her book Kin deals in part with, for a time when she was very young, her family was part of a commune kind of cult called the Body up in sort of the Great Lakes area. And then they left, right? They left that cult and moved back to her family's home in Appalachia and had to then continue to deal with the fallout of that experience and other things. Yes. But, it really was about, her father was in Vietnam. And so came back from that, had come from this background of, just the inherent trauma of all of that. Right. And so he really was, looking for a place to belong. And I really think that's true of a lot of people. And that's why cults fascinate me. I'm not really worried about the leaders. I don't care. They're terrible. But the people, just the ordinary people in these families. Yes. And
well, I read a couple of the books and watched several TED Talks of former members of the Westboro Baptist Church. And it's very fascinating, like you say, to understand what was the thinking. And the truth is, most of the members that I've read or have left were brought up in it.
Right.
And then as they got older, had a reexamination. I think the founder's oldest son, the minute he turned 18, he had his boxes in the car and was gone.
Ready to go. Yeah.
So, but then for someone who's older, who's looking for something or for meaning, it can be very persuasive, especially if they have a message that closely resonates with something you believe in, which could be anything on the spectrum.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a fascinating, and I get that you don't like cults, but I don't like crime, but I watch a lot of true crime stuff. So
yes, no, that's definitely it's just, I think because it would be so easy for that to happen to any of us. That's why it's fascinating.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. How did normal people get persuaded into extreme situations?
Yeah.
Exactly. And usually it's little by little. So, all right. Next on your list.
So this is a pretty abrupt tonal shift here, but I'm actually really excited. So Gail Gibbons, who does children's nonfiction,
yes,
beautiful art, generally about nature, very informative. There have been a lot of updated versions of her books coming out recently. I grew up reading those books, but of course, science is one of those things where we're always learning more.
Right, exactly.
We're always discovering more. And so I'm really excited. Gail Gibbons has a book about owls coming out, and I believe it's a re-release, reworked version. So prior to working at EVPL, I worked at Wesselman Woods.
Oh,
and
neat.
part of my job was to work with the owls. And they're just fascinating, and they're very funny. I will say most owls I have met are not very smart, but
so much for the wise old owl.
yeah, no, that's a myth. Their primary concern is survival, which makes sense.
Of course.
But they're just so interesting and so expressive, most of them are. And Gail Gibbons writes in a way that doesn't talk down to kids, which I appreciate.
I do too. I hate that tone of talking down to. Even when I'm just an observer, it irritates me so much.
Yeah. And so that's one that I'll probably check out when it comes out, but then I will probably purchase for my child's collection just because I like to have well-researched books for my kid that are also fun.
Right.
And I mean, those illustrations are so fun. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, that sounds neat. All right. Going along with our tonal shift here, I'm interested in the book, The Daughter of Dr. Moreau. And this is by Silvia Moreno Garcia, who you may or may not know was also the author of Mexican Gothic.
Yes.
Which was, of course, really, really popular. And one more of those books on my TBR that I will get to eventually.
Yes, you should. It's excellent.
And I love Gothic fiction. So, I mean, I'm kind of surprised at myself that I haven't read it. But this, of course, is a takeoff of the original book, The Island of Dr. Moreau.
Right.
Which was by H.G. Wells. And this kind of actually ties in with my last title of Cults, because even though it's not a cult type scenario, it's this doctor who is basically creating what's called hybrids by incorporating both animal and human creatures. But incorporated with that is that they will always obey him completely.
Yes.
And that, of course, smacks of the whole cultish mindset of this army of you will do whatever I tell you, no matter what it is. And so, of course, as the title suggests, this is about his daughter growing up, living in this situation, and this handsome young man that comes and visits them, and this chaos that he unwittingly creates when he arrives.
Right. I think it's interesting that, so not only are you connecting this to cults, right? And
right.
This girl is essentially growing up in that cult as his daughter, but also this sort of ties into your interest in retellings as well.
Agreed. Which I do. I love a good retelling as long as it's well done.
Right.
I've seen people and I'm like, we just didn't have any ideas of your own, so you just went with that.
Yeah.
But I do love a good retelling, whether it's a new tale of Sherlock Holmes or the retelling of a folktale, things like that. And so I do like taking a classic like that and bringing it forward into the modern day and re-examining it with the mindset that we are in now, as opposed to the one that it was originally written.
Right. In. Yeah. And I also, I will say I really like books told from the kid's perspective.
Yes.
You have this character that we know about, and you have their kid. And I like that because kids have such a different perspective of their parents.
Yes.
When you're really young, you're like, oh, well, my parents know everything.
Right.
And then you get a little older, and you start to have that doubt that creeps in. And that's just fascinating to me. And also it's interesting to see sometimes how characters can act so differently around their kids. Sometimes only for their child do they act this way. So that's interesting because that adds dimension to characters who otherwise might not have a lot of dimension. So that's one I may have to check out as well.
Yeah, I like those layers and layers of what drives and what affects and what changes. So the last thing I'm incorporating is not from our book collection, but from our library of things. And not so long ago, we added an ice cream maker.
Yes.
And so I have placed it on hold. It's got a bit of a waiting list, so it won't happen right away. But I have not made homemade ice cream in probably decades.
Oh yeah. I used to make homemade vanilla ice cream with my mom when I was maybe in elementary school, maybe even younger than that. And it always turned out a little bit wrong. I mean, it was delicious, but something was not right. So
growing up, whenever we would make it, it always seemed especially soft.
yes.
And so I thought, is that just the nature of homemade ice cream? Maybe it just is. But I'm just really curious because a lot of times, maybe that recipe that was common at that time did just generate soft ice cream. But I love how food science marches on. And so things that we used to just go, well, that's just the way it turns out. Now they've come up with these really creative minds going, hey, if you tweak this or add that or do this, you get a better product.
Yeah. And one of the really cool things is with the internet, of course, you can find all kinds of different recipes. And within our collection, too, we've got books that have the ice cream recipes and things.
Yes.
And that'd be really fun to test out and not have to make the commitment to buying an ice cream maker.
Yes.
Because, I don't want to necessarily own an ice cream maker. I'm not going to use it all the time. And I frankly don't have room in my house for it.
Yeah.
So that's just really nice to be able to just check it out. One of the library of things that I checked out recently was a fondue pot.
Oh.
I only needed fondue once.
Right.
We were going to have a fondue night. And I was like, I don't need to own this. I'm not going to use it regularly. It's not worth the expense, but we have it at the library. And it was good. The fondue was really good.
I'm excited that we're adding tools
yes.
so that 1 weekend repair you need to do doesn't require a whole set of tools.
Yeah.
I like that very much. All right, let's finish this off with what have you been reading?
So one of the books that I've read recently is by an author who's originally from Owensboro. And I will give you full disclosure here. Lynn is also my friend. We met at Lambda Literary's Writers Retreat for Emerging Voices in 2018. Mm-hmm. I read a very early draft of this book and then subsequent drafts. And now it's a book that exists in the world. It's The Best Liars in Riverview by Lynn Thompson, who is originally from Owensboro, Kentucky. And it's the story of, it's a middle grade novel. So it's got chapters. It's a sort of chapter book. Mm-hmm. And it's about this kid named A who is in junior high, and A's best friend goes missing right at the end of the school year. And nobody knows where he went, except A does. A doesn't know for sure, but A knows that the two of them had been building a raft together and had talked about running away. And so when A goes and sees that the raft is gone.
Oh.
Yeah. And the thing is, A lives in this small community and everyone talks to each other about everything. And A is really worried that the grown-ups will not know how to handle finding their friend. So A's friend has been bullied for seeming gay or being gay or, he's
appearing
not out,
gay.
but right. And it's that middle school bullying. And the adults haven't been taking care of it. And so A doesn't trust them. And so A is like, no, I'm going to find him. He's my friend. That part is fascinating to me. I love it. The tone is amazing. But also, I mean, I recognize half the places in this, Lynn writes about the heat, the heat and humidity of the summer and what that feels like walking along the road. And
we're experiencing that right now.
Ugh, gross. And then also, at one point, they're near Mammoth Cave, where I went a lot as a kid, and just all kinds of that stuff. It feels so similar to growing up here. And I know that I might seem biased because this is my friend, but it's genuinely, just an incredible book.
That's neat. That's neat. I'm really excited to. And what was the title again?
The Best Liars in Riverview by Lynn Thompson.
Lynn Thompson. That definitely sounds like something worth reading. So the book that I am currently in the middle of is The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. And I actually had another book in mind to read next, but this one caught my eye. Someone described it to me as being similar in concept to the movie Rear Window.
Oh.
Which I love.
Yes.
I love that movie, and I've read other books based on that kind of idea. And so it's definitely very much, I'm in the middle of it, and I don't want to give too much away, but I also don't know how it ends. But basically, this actress in disgrace who is heavily drinking has been sent by her mother to their lake house.
Oh.
And she's recovering from a terrible tragedy. She lost a husband that she loved very much. And at that lake, he drowned in the lake. So I don't think I'm giving too much away. And there's only a few other houses, but she's befriending them. And right straight across the house, or right across the lake, because it's the house across the lake, is this big, beautiful house that's the front side of it is just almost all windows. So it is very much like living in a glass house. And because she's still recovering and because she's heartbroken and she's drinking heavily, she is sitting out on the porch and she just, out of boredom and curiosity, picks up the birding binoculars that her husband left behind and starts watching, but she also makes friends with the family, and the woman in the family is a supermodel. Oh. And so all of a sudden there's this one morning where a scream is heard, and she's already observed some things that she has found concerning, both in person and with her observations through the binoculars, that has made her go, "Whew, I don't know what's going." And after that scream that one morning, her friend is no longer around.
Oh no.
And so it's this whole, what has happened to her? And obviously her first thought is the husband, but what's really going on?
Right.
And so that's as much as I want. I could give a little more detail, but I don't want to, because I don't want to throw out too many spoilers, but I'm definitely to a very fascinating point, and I'm looking forward to see how this is going to end.
Yeah, I might have to check that one out. I've always found those houses that have those big windows, I'm like, that's so pretty. And then I'm like, anybody could see anything.
I mean, my house is never clean enough for that kind of lifestyle.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And just that's fascinating. And being out on that lake too. You're kind of isolated.
Yes, exactly. There are a couple of other families, but of course everybody's aware of her issues.
Right.
And so I think there's this level, especially for people who've known her previously, of, we care about you, but we don't know how seriously to take some of your ideas.
Yes.
So there's just that layer of credibility not being 100%. So anyway, thank you for joining me today, Kirt. I'm so glad to hear your thoughts and your ideas and the things that you've been reading. Definitely adds to my pile. Thank you very much for that.
It never ends. Hey, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. TBR is a series of the EVPL Footnotes podcast. Please like, follow, and subscribe for more great episodes. For comments or questions, our email address is podcast@evpl.org.